Welcome to the Area Podcast from the Ames Regional Economic Alliance. I'm your host, Eric Smith. On today's episode, we are joined by Debi Durham, Director of the Iowa Economic Development Authority. From attracting national brands to the region to supporting expansion projects, we're going to talk to Iowa's biggest advocate about the importance of economic development across the state. This episode is presented by Flynn Wright, Iowa's premier full-service advertising agency, serving clients from coast to coast for over 40 years. Experts in crafting stories that sell, Flynn Wright prides itself on helping brands drive performance and stay one step ahead. Debi Durham, thank you for being on this episode of the Area Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, so Director of the Iowa Economic Development Authority and Iowa Finance Authority. I'll say that you've been a big advocate of the state of Iowa and certainly our organization, but our friend Dan, he says that you're Iowa's biggest advocate.
Well, Dan and I go way back, right? So we've been friends for a very long time. But yeah, I think I actually have one of the best jobs in Iowa. I mean, what's not to like about Iowa? And I get to sell it, 365 days a year.
So I'm gonna probably ask you this about three different ways throughout this conversation. But I mean, your role within this across the state, you're changing the landscape of the state every day. Do you ever think about that?
I don't know. When I get a chance to actually take a step back and kind of look back, because, I started this gig back in 2011, so a lot has changed since then. I think when you're in the midst of it, you don't really realize it. But when you get a chance to take back and reflect and say, wow, we have made, and nobody does it alone, right? It's the team, it's the partnership with the communities. But Iowa's a really different place today, and it just keeps getting better and better. I every time I go into a community, it's just like what they have on the drawing boards, if you will, right? Yeah. What the plans are for the next 5 years. It's like, you're not going to even recognize this place again in the next 5 years. It's really been extremely transformational. And to think that, our organization has had a small part in that is extremely gratifying.
Yeah. Well, I think you're probably required to understate it by saying small part, but your range is across the entire state. So I'm going to bullet point this and then give you a chance to respond. So the Iowa Economic Development Authority, I mean, we're talking about the attraction of business and industry to the state, which we'll talk more about, buildings and sites, certainly financial assistance. We're talking about entrepreneurs, small business support, the expansion of existing business. I'm not done. Historic preservation, arts and culture, the Main Street organizations, housing, workforce development, and I put ... at the end of that.
Yeah.
It could go on and on.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize we're actually the energy office for the state. So that was, they joined us back basically in 2012. We were doing consolidation before it became, the Doge thing to do.
Yeah. Jeez Louise. So how do you wrap your mind around all of that? I mean, certainly you have a team and the team is robust, but do you sleep? I mean, you're zigzagging across the state on a certainly a monthly basis, if not weekly. And how do you wrap your mind around it?
Yeah, so honestly, now if you think about it, with the addition of arts and culture and SHPO, as we just talked about 2 years ago, everything that touches economic or community development is now housed within IEDA and IFA. It truly is a one-stop shop. And the way that Governor Reynolds has really reorganized her entire cabinet, she's really empowered her directors to be problem solvers. So whether I need to work on a DOT problem, it's just picking up the phone and calling Scott or Kayla at DNR or my good friend Beth at IWD. Yeah. We just work so collaboratively, and that really serves Iowans well. So we're actually able to deploy resources in a much more strategic way than we ever could before. And so it's like anything, you just break it down into little manageable pieces. And again, we're all about private-public partnerships. I mean, that's really the winning formula for us.
So let's go back. You said you've been in this role since 2011, but how did you get into this world?
Well, that was purely by accident. It was my very first job out of college, and I was newly married to my high school sweetheart, and we're still married today. And he moved us to this little small community called Miami, Oklahoma. He was running the cable system, and I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this business degree, right, in marketing and manage it with an emphasis on economics. And the chamber was going through some, let's just say, turmoil at the time.
In Oklahoma.
In a small town.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what a chamber did. Apparently, they didn't either because they were struggling. But together, they took a chance on hiring me. I was hired by a room full of all men,
Yeah.
right? And one gentleman in the audience or in the interview process said to me, Debbie, I just have two problems with you. You're young and you're female. And it's like, wow, that's how we started.
Okay.
The same individual, though, that 2 years later actually nominated me for a state award. So we learned together, actually, and it was an incredible. But it was a career that fit for me because it really is about bringing people together to make things happen for their community. And I just said, this is what I want to do. And then from there, we moved to Sioux City, started with the chamber there, and lo and behold, when Governor Branstad won re-election, and I had no idea that was going to happen. I mean, there was never any conversation with him prior to that.
Yeah.
And asked me to lead IEDA. My first reaction was no. What? Because it was going through its own issues at the time.
Okay.
It was the film tax credit scandal, and in
remember
fact,
that.
I love this story because Craig Polson is still around in government, right? He leaves the Department of Management and OCIO, and he was Speaker of the House, and I've known Craig, and I remember calling him when I finally agreed to do this. He was one of the first calls I made before it became public, and I said, Craig, I just have some news I want to share with you, and I tell him I'm going to be their new Director of Economic Development, and there was this long pause. And I said, Craig, are you still there? And he said, well, that really changes things. And I said, how so? And he said, well, because we were thinking about eliminating the Department of Economic Development. So that is where we started. So we've come a long way from there, haven't we? Not only eliminating a department, but actually being the agency that pretty much is the go-to agency when disasters happen, because we're so nimble. And our resources are nimble, and so that everybody calls. Or oftentimes I have to go to the legislature sometime and pay defense because they want to give us more programming that really doesn't align with our mission. But that's where we started.
I mean,
they
that
thought
has
about
to
getting
be,
rid of us.
That has to be tough to navigate, though. I mean,
it was very tough.
I mean, it's I appreciate organizations, and I feel like we're one of them. You're the type of person where it's yes, yes, yes. We're going to say yes. We're going to figure it out. But sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Sometimes it does not make sense. And honestly, I think that's what happens with so many agencies or even organizations. Actually, you need to know who you are and what you're here to serve, right? And we know our mission. We know who we are here to serve. And you get mission creep. And what that does is it begins to dilute what you do. And I've just gotten really good and very nice way of saying to legislators, look, I think it's a great idea. It really doesn't belong with us. And here's why. Because we really want to stay laser focused on our mission. And so,
but you've earned that today to be able to do that. It doesn't make it necessarily always the easiest conversation, but you've earned that. But if we go back to Oklahoma, where you said you didn't know anything about the industry at the time.
I didn't know anybody in the community even, right? So we were brand new.
What were some key takeaways from that point in your career that obviously propelled you to want to keep moving forward in this industry, but also, I mean, I'm sure you had to navigate tough things.
Mm-hmm. I think, honestly, I think it's okay to not have all the answers. And I think it's okay to say that. I mean, I was clearly new in my career. And so the first thing I always do in any situation, no matter what the job is, whether it was starting this chamber in Oklahoma, which we still vacation with people from there. I mean, we consider it our second home. When coming to the chamber, which was also a big move, taking over that operation from what I came from, is you find mentors who will tell you what you need to hear and not necessarily what you want to hear.
It's fair.
And people that can really guide you. And I reach out to mentors every time, and still have those today, because they will help you navigate. And again, sometimes the truth is we just make things up as we go, right? I mean, we do. And some things work and some things don't. And I think it's okay to be honest about that as well. I'm not saying you don't gather data, but there's a point where you can only gather so much data, and you just have to make a decision. So I think that's the other thing. At least I believe, our relationship with the legislature is probably better than it's ever been, because I think they do know that I am very transparent with them and I'm very honest, right? If things don't work, I own it.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't work, what you do is you learn from that and then figure out how to make the changes necessary to make it work. And it also has. So I think that's the key. It's just okay not to know everything.
Yeah.
And who actually is expected to, when you think about how fast-paced our world is
Yeah,
today.
correct. I've been told, and I've heard it several times, our organization, which runs through 3 counties, but we're a problem-solving organization.
That's exactly
and,
right.
And we touch on, at least locally, many of the work that you do statewide, but oftentimes it's, okay, here's something that we need to solve, and how do we do it, and how do we do it to benefit the community?
I think you have done a great job as you continue to expand your reach. And the thing that I really appreciated, as you look at taking on new communities, you really do that evaluation of saying, what do we have to offer them, right?
Yeah, correct.
Can we really service them in the way that we need to service them? And I think the assistance that you have, because I've spent a lot of time in many of these communities that you are now in partnership with, and the accolades they say, and just you can tell just the difference. It's almost like we can do this. I think if nothing else, you bring that sense of positivity, like we've been there before, we've done it, maybe a little different here. Every community has its own, if you will, vibe, right?
Correct.
And so, but you play to that, and but you offer them some incredible resources, and so I really do want to congratulate the great work that you're doing out there.
Well, we talk about providing value. And as you mentioned, that's very different in different communities and in the different types of work that we do. And the interesting thing about value is that it's one, highly relationships. That's a big part of it, but it's also ongoing. Value is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing that, we certainly think about.
And, I'm glad you said relationship, because really, at the end of the day, that really is what it's all about.
Yeah, correct.
And, anytime we're working, and you've heard me say this as we're working with projects like, Daisy being one, I always say we are not about the transaction. It really is about the relationship. And that's because we're going to be here long after these business deals are done, right? And when those are finished, we're going to still be there when you need a DOT issue, or you have something that's going on in the legislature, or even federally, that they can pick up the call. And that's what it's about.
Oh, so that's a great transition. So when we, Daisy certainly was a big highlight for our region and our organization last year. So Daisy Brand is, we're going to be breaking ground here real soon. They are investing, it's now, when it was announced last year, over $600 million into the region. They're going to put up a new 750,000 square foot facility, but now that number is even more. I know the project is continuing to grow and evolve, but it's just a lot of new jobs for our region. And so certainly it was exciting when we were able to announce it. But a project like this, like in your opinion, what does that mean to a region like ours, and certainly the community of Boone and Ames?
Well, the supply chain is huge. And when you think of manufacturing or processing, in and of itself, it can have a multiplier between 5 and 8 jobs. So with every job they bring in, they bring more to the community, which is huge. This one is very exciting when it's in any kind of food process, because, we feed the world, is because it really supports our ag economy.
Yeah.
And, that is, our deal is our deal at the state. It may change a little bit because wages change depending on where you are. But deals are won and lost at the local level. And I will have to say, I thought Boone did a great job. The way they showed up, the way they responded. But I also will say that you all were a critical factor of that too, because I'll never forget when Dan said, I think he felt like it was slipping out of our hands.
Yeah.
And I said, really? And he said, yeah, I think we need to jump on a plane and we need to fly down there. And we did. And Dan was absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because there had been a new decision maker added to the process that we were not interfacing with, right? Again, it goes back to relationships. We had relationships with the individual individuals that we thought were making the decision. So
Yeah.
now you've got a new CFO in there, and the CFO's looking at the numbers. And so it did get down to us in another state. But it was really not to say the state didn't participate more with more incentives, but it really was that local level. And, I thought the city manager did a phenomenal job. In fact, we were at a Main Street event, and I said, as far as I believe, he was like the hero of the story. But I will also tell you the funny part. There's so many funny. I love these deals because you have to approach them from so many different facets, right? And so this one, because of the dairy industry, we had to convince Daisy that we could truly supply the milk, that they needed for this very large
Yes.
processing facility. And so I had a meeting with a group of dairy farmers and never had interacted with them before. At the end of the meeting, apparently they called Governor Reynolds, and after they had convinced Daisy that, in fact, they could provide what they needed, and to rest assured, and I think his exact words as Governor Reynolds was, well, we did what we need to do. Just tell that Debi Durham not to screw up the deal. So I have to get tickled, right? So I was thinking, wow, I am not going to mess up this deal. So how fun.
So I had to look up these numbers today because we talked about them one before. But when we talk about problem solving, the Daisy part is actually a great example. And you talked about, well, we needed to understand dairy production. And so we found out, and I found the numbers. Daisy estimates that they need 3.3 million pounds of milk a day, which is the equivalent to 43,000 cows.
That's amazing. When
It's
you
incredible.
Think about, it is. And now think about this too. And the other nuance of this that I loved, and this is talking about that problem solving that you offer to the communities you serve, and we offer as a state to the clients we serve, was I was talking to one of the county supervisors in a county in which they have obviously a dairy operation. And she was talking to me about the infrastructure getting in and out of the road system. And I think Dan even went and examined it. So I called Scott and I said, Scott, Marler, the head of DOT, I said, I know we do RISE, for infrastructure going into plants, but I am telling you that without this milk supply, to me, it is an extension of that supply chain. Would you ever consider of doing a RISE grant, like extending it as part of a project and fixing that road system there with that particular dairy, and that, county would participate? And Scott said, well, let us talk to the board because we've never done that. And of course, lo and behold, they said, yes, they could make that work. And so that's what I love.
More problem solving.
It's always about problem solving, because how do we get to yes? And as you said, sometimes you can't. But I will say, even from a company's point of view, knowing that you're asking those questions, that you're willing to look at things in a more creative way, has served us well.
This episode of the Area Podcast is sponsored by...
You have a story to tell. That story has a job to do. To be seen. To be heard. To sell. To find inspiration and insight. To use persuasion to change behavior. To turn strategy into tactics, tactics into action. To sell. Nobody does that better than Flynn Wright.
Continental Manufacturing Chemists, located in Huxley, Iowa, is a leading producer of oral care and animal care products for major brands across the United States. Since 1961, they have been a manufacturer of toothpaste, mouthwash, along with shampoos, conditioners, and many other products. As their company continues to expand, they are seeking passionate individuals to join their team, and they are hiring across all shifts. What truly sets Continental Manufacturing Chemists apart goes beyond their advanced equipment and diverse product lines. The heart of the organization lies in its commitment to its team members. In an era where many organizations face challenges in recruiting and retaining talent, CMC has managed to grow significantly because they put company culture first. You can learn more about Continental Manufacturing Chemists and apply online through their website. So if we would take this as a case study, but let's go backwards with it. So how, Daisy is a national brand. And so they can go a lot of different places. And so how does Iowa get on their radar, the state of Iowa, and then how does that process start? And Daisy can be the case study, but this happens out of your office quite often.
Yeah, the Daisy was interesting because they didn't hire a site selector, right? So we knew from the beginning who we were working. Actually, I picked up the phone. It was Chris. I mean, and they did their own search. And they had actually been looking at Iowa, I think it was a year or two earlier. And then, I don't know what changed, whether it was internal or they just didn't find what they were looking for. And so that one was unique. A lot of times they come from site selectors and we have these crazy code names like Project Pharaoh, and then people try to figure out what does that mean. And most of the time who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, they mean nothing.
Yeah, correct.
We have these code names, and it's not until a certain point in time where we even know who we're dealing with, right? I will tell you, though, the state will never, ever offer incentives to somebody we do not know who the code name is.
Fair.
So when I want the public to know that yes, we work with codes until it gets to a certain point.
Yeah, right.
But as you know, they usually start with a pretty big search rate. So like we're working with one site selector on our first mega project, actually. And we were one of 25 sites starting out, right? And I assume that means it was, if not 25 states, close to 25 states. And so now we're one of 3. I don't know if we'll land the deal, but each time you learn from every experience, one, how you can make your case stronger. Are there things we can do from a competitive factor as going through this that we need to do different? Because, we lost a deal on the mega site, which is, a large mega project, is how we started the legislation that we passed a year ago. So everything has a learning curve for us.
So let's get into the mega site, sort of bullet point what that means for those who may not know, but then we'll come back.
So it's really mega projects. So mega projects in our world is $1 billion plus capital investments, just starting with. And then the jobs we only incentivize high quality jobs, but in the mega project, it's kind of like an added. So it pays you have to pay the majority of your jobs 140% of the average wage. So in a lot of communities, that's in the $30 plus an hour range starting out with full benefits. So you are talking, and they have to be within our traded clusters. And in Iowa, just as a reminder to your listeners, that's advanced manufacturing, which food processing is 26% of that. And then you have bio, which is everything from fuels to all the way to medical innovations that we primarily play with the University of Iowa Medical School. And then you have insurance and finance. And then, if you think about it, innovation technology is a important industry here, but it's cross-cutting across those verticals. So it has to be in that space. So it's once we pass the legislation and we've become more competitive, all the stuff that the good work Governor Reynolds has done in the legislature of cutting our income taxes, rolling back regulations. Because again, incentives, there's a point in time where incentives end. They do not go on forever. And contrary to what and I've tried to explain this to other media outlets, you see these awards, but these are performance-based. We don't write checks to people, right? They have to perform before they get any of our benefits. And so now we have the tools with being more competitive, because long after the deal goes away, there has to be a value proposition for the company of, operating value.
So when we talk about sites, and we'll quickly talk about site certification, one of the projects that our team is working on is a 600-acre site in Webster City. And
I'm very excited about that.
They are very excited as well up in Webster City. And so we're going through the site certification process, which is robust. But why is going through that process ahead of time important for a community?
So basically, first of all, you can move at the speed of business. So I had a legislator ask me one time why there was no deals in their community. So I pulled up website. They had no land to sell that was ready. They had farmland, but who knew if the farmer wanted to sell it? They had no buildings. You have to have inventory. It's all about being development ready. And right now, in which deals are being done, we have some site selectors that will say, don't even show me a site unless it's certified.
Yeah.
And the difference of certification is you control the land, the price is set, And there's no I got yous because you've done enough testing to know that they're not going to dig dirt and run into an archaeological dig, right? And so it's extreme. It's about an 18-month process. It's expensive to do, but it gives surety to the company that you're ready to go. Now, we are trying, we've been doing this 10 years. We use an independent group to do it because, I want to make sure that it has this level of scrutiny and accuracy that businesses expect. But, with the pricing getting to where it is, we are evaluating because once I actually looked at some of the prices coming in on this site that you're talking about. Now, we can help them a little bit with that. So we're going to do a national search to say, are there any parts of this surveying that maybe we don't have to do to the level we're doing it?
Okay.
To try to bend that cost curve, because it is my goal that in every county we have land ready to go.
Yeah. And so in many ways, a community doing this, in this case, Webster City, but them doing this ahead of time, they can be part of conversations that otherwise would be non-starters for a company to build there.
Correct.
Okay.
Because, it's no surprise, Eli Lilly made this comment out there that they want, that they're going to make this massive investment in the U.S. manufacturing. And so they have a portal right now that until March 12th, they're taking from communities but they'll need to have land ready to go.
Yeah.
So I would encourage, we've already reached out to some communities that we know have land that's certified and said, you should submit this, right? To at least get us in the queue. Because they know at this point they're not looking at anything else. They're looking at where's land, where's it at geographically and logistically, and then they start getting into all the other stuff. But it begins with the land or the building. But most of the time, people don't have buildings ready to go.
So, we're talking about economic development and site certification. Like, these are normal things that people think about. And, of course, you think about them all the time, and our organization does as well. But 2 years ago, I wasn't in this field, in this industry. And it's funny, so when I came over, and I tell this story quite often, I worked for a large organization here in Ames, and I'm like, I'm a tuned-in community member. We've lived here for 20 years, 21 years, my wife and I know what at the time the Ames Chamber of Commerce does, and I come over and I see this list of things that we're working on. I said, I had no idea.
Correct.
So for those who may not engage with the idea of site certification or attracting business and industry, and the next thing we'll talk about is expansion of projects, why are these things important for the general community, even if they don't think about it on a daily basis? Like, talk about the impact of this type of work.
Well, first of all, when I start every presentation, I kind of talk about how we approach growth in Iowa, right? It's our North Star. And it is about creating a business climate in which our businesses can prosper, and that's taxation, regulatory, certified sites, all the things we've been talking about. But it's equally as important today that we focus on community development, and that is creating places people want to live. And that's about housing and outdoor recs and arts and culture and, the true quality of life. But at the end of the day, for me, we're in the people business. I don't believe all jobs are good jobs. I don't think all development is good development. The development that we are propelling forth at IEDA in partnership with our community are basically development and jobs in which our citizens can thrive and raise the standard of living for Iowans, period. That's why I do what I do. It's all about taking care of people.
So I've heard you say, let's talk about labor for a little bit, and we have low unemployment here.
We always have low unemployment.
Certainly in Iowa, certainly in our region.
We always,
How do we manage that? I've heard you say, we have a population. We have more jobs than what we can
fill. We have a population problem, right? I mean, we have slow population growth. We have aging population. When you look at, the national statistic that 10,000 baby boomers a day are exiting our workforce nationally across all sectors, we can't get there from here.
Yeah.
So we have to grow Iowa's population. And, I don't really pay attention to unemployment because Iowa's always low,
Yeah.
right? We work in Iowa.
That's a constant variable.
It's a constant variable. What I do pay attention to and work very closely with the governor and with IWD is the labor participation has not recovered since COVID.
Okay.
We were 70.3% or 4. I mean, it was, we're second highest in the country. It's, it goes anywhere from 66 to 68. But you still have people sitting on the sidelines. These are not people drawing unemployment. These are people that are no longer engaged in the workforce for whatever reason. So we have to increase that, and we're doing it in a number of ways. I jokingly say population growth is two-path. You need to birth more children, and any of you that can should see that as a state duty, right? To birth more babies. We need babies. But again, I'm not going to be here to see how that works out in the workforce later on. So then we have to bring people here, and that's why we've started talent attraction. But it's also with manufacturing, bring our largest growth state product, why we're incentivizing in automation and digitalization.
Yeah.
Because again, when you tour manufacturing as often as I do, you look at the average age of that workforce is not you, it's me, which is one step towards retirement. And so what we have to do is, one, bring younger people in. And I had a group of students I met with not too long ago, and I asked them of how many of them would ever consider manufacturing as a profession. And I think one or two raised their hand. They probably have parents in manufacturing.
Yeah, sure.
But I said, how many of you like to game? Well, yeah, all of them. Well, these are tech floors. Manufacturing today are tech floors that happen to be manufacturing a product. At the end of the day, unlike me sometimes, you actually know what you accomplished, right? I think if I do a do-over.
Unlike you.
If I want a do-over days. I said if I could ever go back and start education over, it would be in manufacturing. I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so we're doing things with automation to increase efficiency and productivity. But it is about drawing people in, and we have to do all of that. And that gets back to that community development.
Yeah.
People come for jobs, but communities, they want to know, is this a community I see myself living in?
I know that you don't say yes to everything. I'm not asking for an example, but how tough is communicating that message when you know deep down, like, yeah, this could be a pretty good project, but it's not ready yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, we just have to, right?
Yeah.
And so basically you can say, look, when you get to this point, come back and see us. Or sometimes it's just not a good fit for Iowa.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been more times we'd have to say it's not that it's not a good project, but it's not paying the wage scales in which we're going to incentivize.
Okay.
And usually, so I don't know, I think people always just appreciate the truth, right?
Yeah.
And to say, but when you get to a certain level, or we're happy to revisit and stay in touch because people are at different places of their life cycle or their growth cycle as well.
So what's been your professional win from the past week? Do you have one?
Okay, now you're going to think this is really interesting because, we've got some really great companies that we're working with, but I would say a win this week with actually got a piece of legislation to not move forward.
We are in that season.
We are in that season. And, it was funny because when asked, well, how would you fix it? And when you have to deliver the message, I'm not sure it's fixable. I'm not sure it's going to accomplish what we want. And I think there's some really severe unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Now, so I think if I had to pick one thing out of the week, that would have probably been it, because it could have been pretty devastating had that bill passed.
Okay.
Now, I think what I offered to do is say, look, but I'm willing to work with you. And now that I understand what your objectives are, right, what you want to do, I think there's a way to do that. This just wasn't going to get us there. So, let's continue to talk. And, if we can help you find a way to get that done, and then happy to do that. So, yeah. So that's probably not what you expected to hear from me.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, Debbie, thank you for being Iowa's advocate. This is truly incredible. I appreciate you coming on this episode, and please know that this will probably not be your last appearance on our podcast as well.
Well, thank you for doing this. And I just really want to say, I think I feel so humbled to be in this role and have the ability to serve Iowans. And I have to say, I have the greatest respect for Governor Branstad when I started, and the same for Governor Reynolds. And being part of their administration is just, I'm grateful every day for when I wake up.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Debi Durham, the director of the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And of course, for all of you listening, and if you like this podcast, and quite honestly, I'm not sure how you couldn't after listening to Debi, make sure that you subscribe wherever you are listening, and be sure to tell others. I mean, share this episode so that we can celebrate what's happening across the state. This is the Area Podcast from the Ames Regional Economic Alliance, personal stories, professional journeys.